Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this talk. I really appreciate it. Hello to everyone on Zoom and tuning in through Facebook. I am on the board of NAMI Santa Fe. If you're new to NAMI or not that familiar with it, NAMI stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And Santa Fe is a local chapter of the national organization that's been involved with mental health and mental illness and helping those who struggle with mental health conditions and also their loved ones, friends and family that have someone who has a mental health condition. And so I welcome you. I warn you, it's going to be a PowerPoint presentation. I'm doing my best not to make it what some people call death by PowerPoint. We will get going. If my computer will cooperate. There we go. So as Tom mentioned, the title of my talk is Boost Your Mental Health Immune System. And I chose that because I like to, particularly during COVID, I like to make a comparison between having a strong physical immune system. So we are better prepared, if you will, physically to deal with COVID should the virus come our way. But there's also, in my opinion, we have the ability to have a mental health immune system to make us strong and resilient when it comes to challenges such as COVID or other challenges in our lives. And I've deliberately geared this talk, not just for those who struggle with a mental health condition, but basically for everybody. I wanted to share a little bit about me first. I'm retired from a wonderful career in environmental sustainability and renewable energy from the city, county, and state government. I retired about 4 years ago. I am a 25-year survivor of periodic bouts of depression. And I share that not at all to elicit sympathy or anything, but just basically as an example that mental illnesses and people who struggle with mental illnesses are all around us. And it's a fact of life for a lot of people. It's certainly a fact of life for me, but I've been very, very fortunate in having good health care and friends and family that have helped me out during those times when I've struggled with depression. I'm a certified peer support worker. That's a training and certification for people in recovery, either from mental illnesses and or addictions who work or volunteer in the behavioral health sector. I'm also on the board of the LifeLink. If you're not familiar with the LifeLink, it's a 32-year organization, nonprofit here in Santa Fe that provides homeless, mental health, and substance use disorder, essentially addiction services. And also we provide services to victims of human trafficking. And I believe we are the only organization in New Mexico that has a program for victims of human trafficking. And we're looked at as a model for the country. I am on the Santa Fe County Behavioral Health Management Team with my board colleague Betty Shover. As Tom mentioned, the county is about ready to come out with the opening of their new crisis center, which was funded by us, by Santa Fe County taxpayers who approved a bond issue and raising our taxes a little bit, property taxes, to fund that. And I've also been involved with Breaking the Silence New Mexico that takes mental health education to middle and high schools. That's been on hold, or was on hold, at least for me, during COVID. And I hope to rejoin that program in the near future. They've gone particularly online. Before I get into the body of my presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of background comments. This evolved out of a little booklet I drafted back in 2018 that I call A Survivor's Guide to Depression. And when I got that booklet out in 2018 to both mental health professionals and people who deal with mental illnesses, I got some really nice feedback that some of my tips and some of the perspectives I share would be helpful to everybody, to everyone, not just folks who deal with a mental health condition. And so that evolved into this presentation that I think this is the 5th time I've given it since last May. I hope you find some of these tips helpful. The mental health issues are not a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. And so some things may work for you that I share with you tonight, and some things may not. I do want to emphasize that if you feel like you are or may be dealing with a mental illness like depression or like anxiety or what have you, please seek help from a mental health professional. If something's been, seriously affecting you mental health wise for more than 2, 3, 4 weeks, consider seeing a mental health professional. And with my talk and the tips I offer, I'd like to say, take what works for you and leave the rest. Sometimes we like to focus on the things we disagree with or the things we don't relate to, and those things, just let them go, and focus on things that maybe you think might resonate with you. Addressing alcoholism, addictions, and even moderate alcohol or drug usage. That's not directly addressed in this talk. I do want to just highlight the notion that that even moderate alcohol or drug use may compromise your mental health, and probably should give it some consideration if you're already struggling. I also want to emphasize with all of my recommendations, it's important to stay COVID compliant and COVID safe. Do what you feel you're comfortable doing with respect to COVID and taking any sort of even mild risks associated with COVID. And if you're immune compromised, obviously you need to take extra precautions. So essentially, this kind of evolved as I was developing that depression guide, and I came up with what I call the 4 principles of connection for maintaining positive mental health. And so I address the importance of having a connection with yourself, having a connection with others people, having connection with nature, with Mother Earth, and having some form of spiritual or religious connection, provided that, of course, you can relate to that and that works for you. Let's see. I can't read the top of the screen because of the little bar at the top. But staying connected with yourself is kind of a bizarre concept for some people. And it basically involves being at peace with who you are, your blemishes, your downsides, your things that you feel upset about or disappointed with, and not just loving yourself, but liking who you are. Really appreciating who you are. You're a unique individual. We're all unique individuals, in a way, kind of like snowflakes, and you are worthy of being happy, of love, of being appreciated just the way you are. And I think a lot of times we're pretty hard on ourselves. You have a suite of qualities and perspectives and ability that really nobody else has quite the way you do. And it's really important to recognize that in yourself. And it's kind of a trite, you hear it a lot, treat yourself as you would your own best friend. But it's really important. I know this has been important for me because particularly during depression, I'm really hard on myself. Those internal, I'm not worthy voices, or I'm a bad person, or I'm not good at things, are really pretty loud. And it's important to sort of ask yourself, would I be saying this to my best friend? Are these the sort of things, if he or she were sharing with me about themselves, disappointments about themselves, that I'd be kind of repeating back to them? And I think the answer is no. If you remember Stuart Smalley on Saturday Night Live, he was kind of the self-care person who would stare into the mirror. That was, I forget the name, he was a US Senator for a while, Al Franken. I mean, he would look into that mirror and he would say, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. Kind of corny, but I think there's some merit to that, even though it was pretty funny to see. So connection to others during COVID, it's really a challenge. Obviously, we're being instructed to be in lockdown and to isolate, not be around other people. And the fact is, humans are social beings. We really need to interact with and be around other people. Even introverts need that as well. And ideally, we're talking about in person. Well, during COVID, we don't have that option in a big way. And it's caused a lot of mental health strife and challenges for a lot of people, myself included. It's been really hard on me not to be around other people in person. But there are some options to deal with that, even during COVID. And I like to focus on or talk about the importance of community. that when we interact with others, not just individual friends, but when we're a part of a larger organization, whether it's a support group or a book club or people getting together regularly to watch their favorite football team play, there's a sense of community there that is really powerful, that we need to acknowledge and try to establish or recreate during COVID as much as we can. Even before COVID, our civilized world has become increasingly isolating, unfortunately. We have hectic schedules. We're getting all this number of emails, just inundated with emails in our daily lives. And we're hours and hours and hours on our devices. And while our devices, our cell phones and our laptops and our tablets and whatever, provide a lot of benefit to us in a lot of ways, they can also in many ways make us detached, if you will, from being connected to others. And I know it seems weird because with social media, we're connected to hundreds and hundreds of people if we want to be. But the question is, you know, to what extent are those authentic connections, and to what extent, if at all, do they really replace trying to be with people on a more personal level, hopefully in person, but if it's not in person, hopefully via things like Zoom, things like this tonight. And as part of all that, I touched on it a little bit, this notion of belonging to a social group that meets regularly. And the idea that creates a fellowship, a shared understanding or shared interests, and that you hear the word fellowship a lot in the context of places of worship, but it really is way beyond that. I was, at least before COVID, part of a singing group that met once a week. You know, 15 or 20 of us got together and sang. I've been part of a weekly kirtan chanting group, and that getting together with a group of people is really powerful. And it's why I respect people who are religious and go to church regularly, and they really want to be back in church, even during COVID, because of that shared fellowship. And sure, they can worship at home, and they do, I know, but I understand that it's just not the same as going to church and being with people in person. It's a real challenge during COVID. So very importantly, and very near and dear to my heart, is connection to nature, to Mother Earth. Obviously, our planet, Earth, and I always like to capitalize our planet's name, because we capitalize all the other planets' names, and Earth is as special as those. Earth is our home, and it's really the ultimate source of all life, including our own. Everything we have, everything we use, everything we eat is really coming from Earth. Ultimately, it was at one time either in the ground or on top of the ground on soil growing, and here we are taking advantage of it in very different ways. And for hundreds of thousands of years, as a species, as Homo sapiens, we were intricately and intimately tied to nature. I mean, our lives depended on it daily. And so there was we didn't have the ability to not be connected to Earth and to nature. And it's only in the last years or so, 100 years or so, that we've become mostly indoor beings. You know, even say around the turn of the century before last, 1900, people were still significantly outdoors, in their horse and buggies or riding their horses or what have you. And now we spend literally almost all of our time, or certainly a huge portion of it, indoors. And we've lost touch with nature, with the rhythms and cycles of nature, with the sun's movement during the year when we go from a solstice to an equinox and back through the solstice. And the moon cycles, like, is it a waxing moon or a waning moon? And is it a full moon or a new moon? And we've lost touch with growing our own food. We go to a grocery store and, you know, buy food in packages, and we're out of touch with where that food came from. And there's a real thing in the mental health world that's called nature deficit disorder. And it is indeed a real thing that a lot of us experience if we don't go out of our way to connect or reconnect with the natural world, and even just small and tiny ways. And so I urge people who are maybe not as in touch with nature as they would like to be, or they think maybe they would like to be, to really think about how they can connect, maybe even for the first time with nature. And the good news is nature's right outside our door. Nature's right in our backyards and in our front yards and in our neighborhoods. We don't have to go for some big wilderness hike. I love this Japanese phrase called Shinrin Yoku. And it's a philosophy that literally means forest bathing. It means that not so much going for a hike and getting a lot of exercise, but just getting out into a forest and taking in the energy of the forest, of the trees, as a philosophy and as a way to stay grounded emotionally. I read somewhere that there are doctors in Scotland that are now prescribing to their patients going for a walk. Like, take a half-hour walk each day, and they write a prescription and they say, here, go fill that prescription by doing this every day. And I think that's a nice idea. And then last but not least is having some sort of spiritual or religious connection. If you can already relate to that, if you're already part of a religious practice, keep that up, or reacquaint yourself with it if you've let it go a little bit in your life. And I'd like to say that, with all due respect to those who embraced organized religion, having a spiritual orientation or practice is not necessarily about needing to believe in God or even in higher power. Personally, I rejected religion and spirituality for decades until I realized that nature was my spirituality. Nature and the beauty and diversity and magic, if you will, of nature was my spirituality, and that's really helped me ever since. And again, if you can't relate to this, if you're an atheist or just simply can't relate to the notion of spirit, let that one go. It's not that important. Although certainly I would encourage everyone to give it a go, as I did, because I was pretty resistant to it. This is really neat. I discovered this book about 2 months ago, and it's called Lost Connections. It's written by, I think you might pronounce it, Johann Hari. And it's a great book that goes into incredible detail with a lot of research on how we've lost connection in our lives and how we can reestablish connection in our lives. It's a New York Times bestseller. Johann Hari wrote another bestseller book before this that was about basically the failure of the drug war and our failed approach to how we deal with addictions. This book, I'm about 2/3 of the way through it now. It's kind of interesting because Hari was writing this book in 2018. I was writing my little tiny depression booklet at the same time. I was not aware that he was coming out with this book or even that he existed. But it turns out that what I came up with independently with respect to what I call the 4 principles of connection, Hari basically goes over that and more. He's got about 9 principles of connection, and I really recommend it for everyone. The subtitle is a little bit of a misnomer, where it says why you're depressed and how to find hope, because this book is really, just like my talk, hopefully, is really about maintaining people's mental health and really trying to live as happy and as rewarding life as possible. And so I wanted to give that book a little airtime. I actually wrote Hari and he wrote me back. I wrote Hari and told him I had a mental health presentation that was similar to his book, and he wrote me back some nice words, and that was kind of nice. So I like to focus on that it's important that we take charge of our mental health. And it's really up to us, and whether we're just sad about or unhappy with our lives, I shouldn't probably have the word just in there, or we're dealing with clinical depression, it is ultimately us, in other words, me, to do something about it. Now, others can and will help us with our journey back to mental health and happiness, but in a way, we really need to be in charge to the extent we can. I know that when I've been in the deep, dark throes of depression, That's not easy. That could be an intimidating thought. I can't even, I have trouble taking charge of, brushing my teeth practically. And for those that do struggle with depression or other mental health conditions, taking charge may mean just taking little teeny tiny steps each day, like making your bed or going for a 10-minute walk or bothering to take a shower and put on nice clothes or what have you. So it's a gradation of where you are with respect to your own mental health and your own ability to be motivated to do some things. And finally, on this topic, it's really important that you praise yourself for the actions you are taking to get healthy and happy, however small they are, that you really recognize that, hey, I'm really trying to do something here. And just that, the act of trying to do something will help out. Even if what you're doing in and of itself or by itself doesn't have some, and it's not going to have some magical way of making you feel quite a bit better right away. If I didn't say it previously, none of these things I'm recommending, including, and I don't recommend medication, but I address it. None of these tips are going to by themselves, solve things or make life a lot better by themselves. But I've found that collectively, if you can take on and embrace and adopt quite a few of them collectively, they do seem to help quite a bit. And again, this is not a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. And I also want to emphasize that I'm not perfect at these things, and I struggle a lot of the time with trying to implement, if you will, some of these things. And I have periodically, my depression got bad in the late summer of last year, and I went back into this presentation and reacquainted myself with things I needed to do to help get through it. So here's where I get into some more concrete or specific tips around applying those 4 principles of connection. And the first is really, really important. Be patient. Be patient with yourself. Positive change takes time, especially when it comes to a significant mental health challenge, and especially when it comes to a mental illness like depression. I know when I first got my first bout of depression, I was about 35 years old, about 25 years ago. And, I went to the psychiatrist, and while I wasn't wild about taking an antidepressant, I really wanted that to be the happy pill. I wanted to take it. And like 3 days later, I just wanted to be all better and go back to my life. And that just was not going to happen. And even if it's your mental health is compromised, it's going to, it took a while to get there. It's going to take a while to get back to an area, a place in your life emotionally where you feel good again and you can feel happy again, and things that normally have caused you joy and happiness will return and do so again. And so that really relates to the concept of acceptance, which I get into a little bit later. The importance of just sort of not fighting your mental health situation, but just being patient with it and know that you can get better and feel happy again with patience and with taking some actions. Don't isolate. I addressed that a little bit. It's really tough during COVID, but there are opportunities to not isolate, to bring back the phone conversation. Like, wow, what a concept! Instead of texting somebody or what have you, or emailing, it's like you pick up the phone and you actually have a conversation. And these Zoom gatherings, so many support groups and trainings, and they're not a perfect replacement for in person, but they're kind of the next best thing, as long as we don't overdo it. My family, my extended family of about 15 or 20, we've had probably, maybe 5, what I call family reunions. And that's been fun. And that's worked out really nicely to get everybody together on Zoom and have a get together. One thing I will recommend, because once you have probably more than 5 or 6 people on a Zoom, You really had to have somebody run the meeting, because if you just let it be a free-for-all with 15 people, nobody can really say anything. And so you need someone to at least sort of call on people and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be mega structured, but our first family reunion had about 25 people. Nobody ran the meeting, and it was a free-for-all that was funny for about 10 minutes. And then I think everybody got frustrated because nobody could really get a word in because everybody was stepping all over each other talking. But there are opportunities to get together with people in person, outside. I think we probably all know that the COVID risk outside, outdoors, with our masks on and with keeping our distance, is relatively safe. I've done that some. I've particularly when it was warmer in the summer and fall, I noticed people having people over, like one couple would have another couple over to visit in their front yards. They would be sitting 12 feet apart in chairs, but they'd be interacting outdoors where the air circulation and the air dispersion made it pretty darn safe. And I'd like to address particularly that isolating is very common during depression, and sometimes it's really, really hard to overcome. And I just say, fight it when you feel up to it. And if you're not up for it and you're just feeling like isolating, and I've been there, believe me, go easy on yourself and just let yourself isolate. But try to, when you can, connect with people in any way you can. And important one kind of relates to getting with others is get out of the house. I understand the COVID stay home message. It's a simple message. It's a message to make sure people aren't going out and about socializing, left and right with everybody. But it really does not mean stay locked inside your home 24/7. This thing that we've all heard of called cabin fever is real, and it can set in, and it can be pretty awful, and can lead to a real decline in one's mental health. My mother lives in a senior living facility here in Santa Fe. She's 90 years old. And when they were in mega lockdown, she was pretty much in her 400 square foot apartment 24/7. They had to cancel congregate meals downstairs in the dining commons. She had her meals brought to her. There was a while when she couldn't even come out and visit me outdoors. And it was a real struggle for her. She definitely got a form of cabin fever. Thank goodness she had her cat Sully, or she might have really, really had a challenge. It's okay to go for a walk in your neighborhood, and I encourage you to do so with your mask on. It's easy to stay 50 feet away from other people. You're getting outdoors. I've learned a lot about my neighborhood and different areas in my neighborhood with my walks with my dog. I will encourage you, and this is kind of one of my themes, is to do so if you can without your smartphone, without your cell phone, because it's really important, if you can, to be as present as possible when you're out and about. And if you're out and about walking, and if you're checking your cell phone every 30 seconds or 2 minutes for your emails or texts or whatever, you're no longer being present, or what we call mindful. I believe, and the book I mentioned goes into it somewhat, but there's a lot of benefits to the cell phone, but there's a lot of downsides to how much we've become obsessed with our cell phones. And to the extent we can kind of give it a rest, I think it's really helpful. Gardening or just hanging out in your backyard, obviously gardening right now is a little bit of a challenge. And as I mentioned, visiting with a friend in their front yard or backyard is pretty COVID safe, and certainly COVID compliant, provided there's not 5 of you. Number 4 is really important, and that's really be wary of social media. Everyone's life is awesome on Facebook. Everyone, when they post things, most of the time they're posting all these incredible things about their lives, their new job, their new relationship, some sports thing they're doing, or how many miles they ran today. And nobody's really pointing out some of the challenges in their life, because, why would we? But if you're already feeling down, you're going to by comparison go, wow, look at how everybody else's life looks like great. And look at me, I'm here, depressed or sad or whatever. And so, be careful about that. And there's obviously a lot of angry, disrespectful discourse on social media. A lot of people are unfortunately very, very abusive and disrespectful. And frankly, that's on both sides of the political spectrum. I find it to be fairly toxic, and I really have to be disciplined myself to not engage in that way on Facebook, because there's really no point. I'm not going to convince anybody that the way I look at the world or the way I look at politics is the way they should, and vice versa. And it's just really kind of irritating and depressing to engage in that. So do your best to try to avoid it. It's a form of an obsession that, again, I really struggle with. And if you can do a social media timeout, turn your phone off, or just say, hey, for between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., I am not going to go on social media. I'm going to take a rest. I'm going to take a nap from social media. That's a good thing. There are really good support groups on social media. I attend one through an inpatient program I did 11 years ago that are great. NAMI Santa Fe has support groups online that are just wonderful. Check out our website to check them out. We have a weekly support group for those who struggle with a mental health condition, what we call peers, and we have a twice a month support group for family and friends of those who struggle with a mental health condition. And I encourage you to check those out. I guess look at your devices and your cell phones and also social media with caution, and sort of try to keep an eye toward, what things might be kind of toxic for me and not really healthy for me to engage in, and what things maybe would be nurturing for me to engage in on social media. I've stayed connected or reconnected with friends from high school through Facebook that have been really wonderful. So it's a matter of having discipline with our devices and with social media, and it's really not easy, but give it a try. Kind of related is limit your news intake, whether it's online or on the television or even on print media. So much of news is negative, murders and oppression and wars and that sort of thing. It is important to stay COVID informed via news outlets, but don't overdo it. There's a lot out there that can really be kind of intimidating and frightening about what's going on with COVID and these new strains and mutations and what have you. And it's easy to kind of read too much and stay too in touch with that. And so I'd say consider also a news timeout here and there. And something I've just added recently, because I've been asking myself this a lot, is when I'm scrolling through Facebook and there's a lot of articles on there about topics that I'm interested in, I've started to ask myself, do I really need to read this article? The information it's going to give, do I really need that information? And if I answer no, well, then maybe I move on and say, okay, particularly if I ask my question, if I read this, is it just going to really get me upset or angry? And sometimes we have to read things or because we want to be informed and we don't want to be out of touch or not know, something about COVID that maybe we really ought to be knowing. But I've started to, just in the last month, I've started to ask myself those two questions. And a lot of times find myself scrolling by articles and of course the comments that go with them that I know are really just going to upset me. So 6, again, get outside in any way, shape, or form. The sun, fresh air, sitting by a creek are all mood enhancers. In the summer, the bodies of water, whether it's a lake or a pond or a stream, they give off negative ions, and negative ions are actually known to be mood enhancers. That's why a lot of people get irritated on a windy day, because we naturally have negative ions that sort of attach to or hang out around our skin. and wind actually blows those negative ions off of us. So I like to use the phrase ecotherapy. It relates to that Japanese phrase Shinrin Yoku. And any form of being outside is all good. Whether it's just a walk in your neighborhood, to reading in your backyard when it warms up, or to a challenging hike in the wilderness. And when you are outside, try to be as present and mindful as possible. Try to leave your cell phone behind, or at least keep it in your pocket, and really be as aware as possible of your surroundings. Really pay attention to the sounds that you hear, whether they're natural or the traffic, birds that are flying around or chirping. Just really be what some people, particularly the younger generation, call it, like, be woke. I like that phrase, like, to be woke. I think that's kind of cool. Gardening and landscaping are really great options in the spring and the summer. Soil actually has serotonin in it, or at least it reacts with your body to create serotonin, which is a mood enhancing brain chemical, and antidepressant meds. Obviously, we can't garden or landscape in the winter, but one thing we can do is we can bring nature, we can bring the outdoors indoors by having house plants. And so I find that my house plants, and my house is littered with them, are really helpful to stay in touch with nature and the outdoor world, particularly in winter. And related to being indoors because it's winter and not being able to be outdoors as much is try to let as much natural light in your house as possible. Open up those curtains and those blinds and let in that natural light, because studies have proven that natural light is really healthy for us, and artificial light is not so healthy for us. And so the more you can bring natural light into your home, the better off, the better chance of having your mental health be better will be. Move your body. We all hear about the benefits of exercise, and really any form and any amount of exercise will both help you feel better physically and feel better about yourself. Just 2 20-minute walks a day can be a big difference. Studies have proven that when we do exercise, whether it's aerobic exercise where we get our heart rate up for 20, 30 minutes and maybe even sweat a little bit, that increases blood flow to the brain. And studies have proven that the more we can increase blood flow to the brain, the better off our mental health can be. If you know Dr. Amen, Dr. Amen is a brain health specialist that's on PBS a lot. He really likes to focus on increasing the blood flow to the brain. He actually recommends like dry saunas that actually heat up your body and increase your blood flow to the brain. If you can do aerobic exercise, if that's something that works for you, it can really be a nice mood lifter. You've probably heard of the phrase runner's high, which is that natural chemical that gets created called endorphins that are a mood lifter. I know when my depression's been really bad, I've fortunately had the motivation to go to the gym and get on the elliptical for 40 or 50 minutes and get my heart rate up and sweat. And it doesn't make my depression go away, but it really helps lift it for the next 3 or 4 hours. And that can be a benefit, even if you're just struggling with your mental health and you don't have a mental illness. If you can only exercise once a day, if you're able to do so in the morning, it will help, because you'll feel good about having done it, and it'll just help benefit the rest of your day. Obviously, if you have to wait till you're done with work or whatever, that's certainly great too. 8 is really important. Ignore those critical negative voices inside your head. I think a lot of us have them. I know they're really, really loud when I've been dealing with depression. And it's just important to recognize that they're not real. They're just not real, and they don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes I've actually said that to them when these voices in my head say, you're not worthy, or you're a bad person, or what have you. I just turn around and say, you know what? You do not know what you're talking about. And there are ways to calm those voices, or at least to distract yourself from those voices. Meditation can be really helpful. It's not for everybody, or even simple breathing techniques can be really helpful. When it comes to meditation for newcomers, guided meditation, whether it's recorded or live, where somebody walks you through a visual, if you will, and helps you with your deep breathing, can be really beneficial. That's pretty much what I still do. I haven't really graduated that well into meditating on my own without some guided assistance. And you can find all sorts of neat guided meditation recordings online. And you don't need to do it for that long. I mean, if you could do it for first 5 minutes and 10 minutes, it can be really, really helpful. And particularly with the deep breathing techniques. Most of us are shallow breathers, and we're not really oxygenating our bodies and our minds with the sort of shallow breathing we do pretty much all the time. Self-help reading, self-help books for both life in general and mental health conditions like depression. I've found there's so many out there. I've found this book, Emotional Sobriety, has been really, really helpful for me. I just gave you that book about lost connections earlier that I would recommend. And then these, what I call personal growth, personal journey novels, like The Alchemist, which is a classic by Paul Coelho. And one my mother turned me on to, Pearl S. Buck's The Good Earth, written back in the 1930s, is really just a beautiful book. If you're in Santa Fe and you're familiar with the bookstore, The Ark, I've actually, particularly when I've been depressed, just gone down to The Ark. They have a great collection of self-help and personal growth journey books. And I'll just sort of like loiter there for a while looking at them and grab one or two and bring them home with me, buying them first. And they've really been beneficial. Healthy diet. It's often emphasized and often really ignored. And it's really too bad, because how we fuel our bodies and therefore how we fuel our minds is really, really critical. You know, I'm not saying change your diet overnight, but really give it some thought about it. You're eating fruits and vegetables, whole grains, that sort of thing. And sugar and high fructose corn syrup, which is in lots of processed foods and sodas, is really, really hard for mental health. And studies have proven that. Again, just a quick mention of alcohol and drug use. Alcohol is a depressant. And I know a lot of people are getting benefits out of medical marijuana. And I'm just really saying that when it comes to any alcohol or drug use, you know, give it some thought, think about whether it's, you know, helping you or not. I had still do have actually, but I've wrestled most of it to the ground. I've had a real problem with marijuana and a marijuana addiction. And I really discovered that marijuana combined with having a propensity for depression, really, you know, they went well together. I'm convinced that my heavy marijuana usage probably increased my frequency of depressive episodes, probably kept my depression longer, my bouts of depression longer. So anyhow, again, just to give it some thought. Volunteering and being of service to others. I love this quote by the Dalai Lama: and to make others happy, be compassionate. To make yourself happy, be compassionate. Being of service to others is extremely rewarding, however small or however large. You might remember that movie called Pay It Forward, and Pay It Forward was all about basically being of service to somebody else, whether or not you expected it in return from them. I think it's a really important thing to embrace in maintaining your mental health. And it's different than just, you know, getting out your checkbook and writing a nice check to a charity or what have you. That's really helpful, but it's not the same as having skin in the game, if you will, with respect to being of service. Embrace acceptance. Most of what goes on in the world and much of what happens in our personal lives, we just don't have control over. And that's been a real source of fuel, if you will, of my depression before I was able to really embrace acceptance. The injustice and the violence and the oppression that goes on around the world was really, really upsetting to me. It may be that I am what a friend of mine calls a super empathic, that I really sort of take on the pain and suffering of others. And I finally, it took me until about 10 years ago, finally figured out a way to accept that I was not going to single-handedly change that, and I had to accept that. There are things in our lives that we can't control that are history, you know, and it's important to accept those things. And which is not to say that if you have serious trauma in your life from years ago, that I'm suggesting that, you know, you downplay it, and it may be for that type of trauma that it will be with you in one form or another for all of your life. Hopefully you can get help and adopt a way of processing and dealing with that trauma. Acceptance does not mean apathy or complacency, even though sometimes when you get really good at it, it can feel like apathy, but you're still caring about the things that maybe really upset you about what's going on around you. You've just accepted that you're not going to single-handedly change it. Embracing gratitude is extremely important. We often focus on the negative aspects of our lives. It's really to also important to recognize the positive things in our lives that sometimes we get out of touch with or we take for granted. Whether it's you have a job, you have a roof over your head, you have some nice friends and family, and that sort of thing. Quickly, for those who are depressed, just about wrapping up here, those who deal with a mental health illness, again, my thing is mostly depression. Some people struggle with anxiety and bipolar and schizophrenia and other things. It's really important to see an individual therapist. They really do help. They really do work. Be completely honest with your therapist. Years ago, when my depression got really bad, I was suicidal. I don't think close to actually making an attempt, but my psychiatrist and my therapist asked me flat out, Craig, are you doing suicidal ideation? Are you thinking about suicide? And I was so embarrassed or ashamed. I said, no. I actually lied to my therapist, who I was paying to help me get better, because of my shame. And it was like ridiculous. So I do urge you, if you're going to go to therapy, be as honest as you can with your therapist. Find another if you're not clicking with them. The magazine Psychology Today, their online website, is a really great way to find a therapist, coupled with maybe looking on your insurance to see, you know, who's on your plan. And group therapy and support groups, again, like NAMI has them, they're really, really powerful in ways different than individual therapy. They give you a feeling that you're not alone, that you're not the only one dealing with these things. Others benefit from your story and feedback. You benefit from their story and feedback. Confidentiality is both pledged and sacrosanct. I find that group therapy, which can be structured, group therapy is a little different than support groups because they're facilitated by a professional therapist. They're really, really powerful in a way that, like I said, is different than individual therapy. And again, praise yourself every time you take charge, doing anything, however small, to get better. A quick note on antidepressant medications. It really is a personal decision. I encourage you to do research into it. I don't recommend, I'm not in a position to recommend or not recommend antidepressant meds. And I would urge you to use a psychiatrist if you're going to consider doing meds, because they know a lot more about the ins and outs of these antidepressants than do your primary care physician. A few more final thoughts. Pets and animals are really, really critical. They're a form of connecting with nature. They're a form of bringing nature and our connection with wildlife in with us. My cute dog Lobo there, I adopted him last March, right before lockdown. I like to think that he rescued me, and I like to think that he really helped me through the last 11 months. My life, my emotional state would have been really a lot worse off without my dog Lobo, who I'm surprised hasn't been barking at me, because he gets jealous sometimes when I get on the internet and barks at me. And he's also been a source of getting me to walk my neighborhood, because while I'm a big hiker, I'm not that big of a walker around my neighborhood if I don't have a dog. And then finally, sleep. Sleep is so critical for physical and mental health. And to the extent that you can get in a good 8 hours, do so. Some people, particularly older people, have what's called sleep apnea, where you're actually not in a deep sleep because you subconsciously keep waking up. And there are take-home tests to determine whether you have sleep apnea. So I just wanted to give a little airtime to that. And with that, I just would love to wrap up and wish you all the best in maintaining your own mental health and those that friends and family that you care about and that care about you. I put my email up there for a reason. I am retired, woohoo. And if you have any questions or want to contact me, feel free to email me. And with that, Tom, I'd be happy to address any questions or thoughts people have offered in the last hour.
Craig, thank you, and thank you very much for your presentation, the thought that went into it. I think I especially liked all the time you related your recommendations to your own story and history. That just, especially getting to see a picture of your dog, that was really, really moving for me. Before we go into questions, Betty, could you go ahead and announce what you put up in the chat? Because I think that's really important. You're on mute, Betty.
Sorry. Yeah, a friend told me about that yesterday. I haven't tried it, but AARP here in New Mexico has these virtual classes, exercise classes, and I don't know. I don't think you have to be a member. They say free. But if you had to be a member, what's the membership? About $12 a year or something. So that's just the information there for that. And there's a lot of other virtual classes out there for yoga, for Pilates, and so you could look around and find lots of things for that.
Okay, with that, do we have any questions for Craig? Jessica, you raised your hand. You've got some Facebook ones?
Yeah, someone asked, what do you think of Amen clinics? And I'm not sure if it's Amen or Amen, and have they been controversial in the medical profession?
Yeah, thank you. I actually, it's Dr. Amen. He's a really neat guy. And I actually almost went to his clinic years ago when my depression got really bad. So yes, Dr. Amen is a fascinating man, and he's a MD, and I think he might be a psychiatrist. He's done a number of really wonderful seminars on PBS. So if you Google Dr. I think it's Daniel Amen, A-M-E-N, and he has his approach to mental health and mental illnesses is heal your brain and heal your mind. And so he goes into the physiological aspect of the brain. In fact, his big thing is to do brain scans, to actually look at what's going on in various areas or chambers of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala and all, the hippocampus and all that, and talks about things we can do in our everyday lives that actually will help heal our brain physiologically, such that it helps us from a mental health and an emotional standpoint. In fact, a little bit earlier in my talk, I referenced one of the things he actually recommended, which was if you can go and be in a hot sauna, whether it's a steam or a dry sauna, for 15 minutes, that heat will actually increase the blood flow to the brain. And so, yeah, I think Dr. Amen is the real deal. I don't know whether he's controversial or not. I haven't really run across that. I think in general, he's pretty darn well respected. And I would encourage viewers to check out his various videos that you can get via PBS, if not his own website.
Thank you, Betty.
He's controversial.
Is he?
Yeah, and part of it is because he uses a lot of brain scans to determine things, and I think brain scans are still kind of not total science yet.
Right.
Okay.
So
One thing that he does acknowledge in his talks is that brain scans are expensive, and not everybody can afford to get a brain scan before they figure out what they should be doing. And so he's basically developed a methodology for helping people increase their brain health, if you will, without having to go and spend $15,000 on a brain scan or whatever it is.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Jessica, any others from Facebook?
I'm not seeing any more on Facebook.
Excellent. Well, Craig, I want to thank you very, very much for an outstanding presentation. Lots of good ideas, lots of food for thought for everybody. And, I look forward sometime in the future to having you back when we can all be in the same room, maybe even someday without masks on. Every time I walk into the bank with a mask on, I think to myself, I never would have thought I'd walk in a bank with a mask on and ask for money.
Yeah, right.
Just wasn't in my plan for my future. So, maybe someday we'll all sit down and talk about everything we've experienced in COVID. And some of it has been good. Moving these panels online like this has really been playing very well. I do see one question in the chat that just came up, and I don't know if this is for everyone.
I see that question. The question, Tom, is how does culture play a role?
Yes.
I am Indian, and therapy is hardwired in society. That's an excellent question. I have to confess, I'm probably not in a great position to be able to answer that, except to say that culture plays an enormous role, whether it's indigenous culture or Latino culture, African American culture. It plays an enormous role in people's mental health and how people of different cultures relate to or don't relate to different modalities, if you will, for dealing with their mental health. And so I know there's a coalition in New Mexico called the New Mexico Suicide Prevention Coalition. And there's a subcommittee of that is made up of all New Mexican indigenous peoples, Dene and Pueblo and Apache. And they address mental health and behavioral health issues specific to their culture and their identity as indigenous people. And there's also the National Latino Behavioral Health Association, whose executive director actually lives right here in Cochiti, and they address behavioral health and mental health issues from a Latino and Chicano standpoint. And so it very much is these mental health and mental health treatments and such do very much need to recognize cultural identity and cultural specifics. And NAMI, and more, NAMI at the national level is wanting to focus more and more on how to be, how to cater, if you will, the mental health message to specific cultures based on the differences that those cultures have and identify with.
Excellent. Thank you.
Tom, I just wanted to quickly mention for viewers, for anybody that that we're not able to catch tonight's talk, we NAMI Santa Fe, we record these and they are available on our website. So if someone you think might benefit from seeing this presentation, you can go to our website or they can go to the website and click on it. And I encourage everyone, if you haven't spent any time on what NAMI Santa Fe has to offer, go onto our website and snoop around. Our own staff person, Jessica Shover, is in the process of revamping our website, and it'll be even bigger and better than ever than what we've had. But we've got a lot of really good resources on our website for both those that have a mental health condition and their loved ones that care for them.
Thank you, Craig. We've got one last question. How do you feel about TMS?
TMS, that's a great question. So transcranial magnetic stimulation is what it is, and it's a form of, I'm not an expert in it, but it's a form of using magnetism as a way to target specific areas in the brain that are believed to be misfiring, if you will, with respect to causing one to have depression or another mental illness. There's a psychiatrist in town named Dr. Jefferson Davis. And when my depression was really bad and antidepressant meds were not really helping me, and I had gone through a bunch, I started to go down the road of looking at TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And Dr. Davis at the time was kind of pioneering it in the country. It turned out that my depression started lifting and getting better. I did not do TMS. But in my subsequent time with Dr. Davis, going back to see him over the years, he's basically been very, very pleased with the response of TMS for people. And so again, I'm not recommending it, but I certainly think that for those that have gone through a lot of meds and are still struggling with a mental illness, it's certainly worth researching and talking to your psychiatrist about.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out that I think we had Dr. Davin Quinn, who was a psychiatrist from UNM, speaking about that at our September 8th talk last year. And that talk is posted on our YouTube channel, which you can get to, I believe, Jessica, from our webpage. And so if you want to go back and take a look, that was an absolutely excellent talk about magnetic stimulation and how it's used for depression. The other thing I would like to mention is we have a talk coming up shortly in May. Our May 11th talk is Dr. Lucas Dunkley, who is a psychiatrist at UNM, going to talk about the use of esketamine for depression, which is a new drug therapy that some people are having really, really excellent results with. And what's very special about it is it works very, very fast for the people it works for. So that's another good talk coming up on depression.